Back, everybody. We had a little bit of a break. Glad to see that everybody's showing up. What I wanted first to do, I had sent around a series of articles, and I'll do that periodically, just because I find interesting stuff in the news. I won't do it every day or every week, but if you are at all interested, it's automatically on my Twitter account, so if you do want to subscribe, go ahead. Lots of stories, just like the ones I sent around on email, I guess it was over the weekend. One of them that particularly hit a nerve with me because I've been looking into it is this issue of, let's see, okay, hopefully you guys can see my screen now.
We're seeing you.
Okay, hold on.
We're seeing you. We're not seeing the slide.
Okay, so I'm trying to. How about now?
We see the slide.
Great, thank you. Well, this particular topic caught my eye because I've been reading about it and looking into it, and I think it's a really fascinating notion, the idea of sending bulk water across international borders. So I just wanted to spend a few minutes just to I don't know, see if it generates any interest, any discussion, and it also, I think, leads into our topic of human rights. And in this particular article, they were saying it wasn't likely that Canada is going to start exporting. They've been talking about trying to export out of Alaska. There's a company out there that was talking about putting water into tankers, and it was glacial waters. So pretty good quality stuff. But the concerns have been transportation costs, environmental issues, and so on. But I just wanted to just point out a few things that this is not new. We've actually been transporting water in bulk, and I don't mean bottled water. We've been actually transporting water in bulk for quite a number of years around the world. And the best example is this Malaysia to Singapore. And that white thing that you see right there, those are pipes. Those are water pipes, and they go right across the narrow strip of ocean that's between the island of Singapore and the mainland of Malaysia. And they've been doing this since the 1930s or 40s. They've had contracts to buy bulk water. And that's how Singapore has been surviving for so long, because Singapore does not have very much local freshwater resources. They have rainwater, and they can desalinate, but that's really quite expensive. And this bulk water transfer through the pipes is actually much more feasible. In the last number of years, couple decades, Singapore has become much more water efficient. They're doing a lot of recycling. So this is supposed to get phased out by about 2060. But it's a great example of bulk water transfer, where you're actually taking water across an international boundary between countries. Lesotho in South Africa is another example where this is actually happening right now. And this is happening in part via the river, but also through some channels that they've carved out. And Lesotho is in a very highlands area. It's completely surrounded by South Africa, but they have some... South Africa is in considerable need of freshwater resources. Just a couple of examples. U.S. and Canada, we don't do a lot of bulk in the sense of what Singapore or South Africa does, but we actually have these really tiny contracts between sister cities. And these two sister cities on either side, they have an agreement, and when it becomes feasible for only one side to extract water, whether it's from surface or groundwater, and they have pipes running across the border. What I think is really interesting in these particular examples, the Foreign Ministry in Canada and the U.S. State Department have not been involved in these international transboundary transfers of water. I think it's really amazing that it's happening. I'm not saying it shouldn't, but this is something that I think has been somewhat under the radar. One other really interesting example, I don't have the other slide I wanted, These are pipes that are going into the ocean underneath the Mediterranean, about somewhere in, I think they're going a couple hundred feet, so below shipping level, to Cyprus. And they're just about complete, or at least the pipes are complete. They're now, I think they're working on the receiving facility, and they're supposed to send the first amount of water this or next month. So this is a pipe coming out of Turkey, going into the Mediterranean, floating about 200 feet below the surface of the Mediterranean, and then coming back up on Cyprus, because Cyprus is very, very water scarce. Again, and they're paying for it. This is a purchase. Other transfer mechanisms. The shipping container. A few examples where this has happened. I think in 2008, I remember Barcelona was under a serious water scarcity problem, and they ran out local sources, and they started shipping in water from, I think it might have been Sardinia and then the south of France, in these containers. The problem is that it's extremely, extremely expensive, because the cost of water, the price of water is not the same thing as oil or gas. So it was very expensive for them. So I've only seen this happen in emergency situations. And then the bottom left, that's a big, giant plastic bag. It's called a Medusa bag. And you can sort of see at the very right side of that bag is a little white thing, and that's a boat. That's a tugboat. This bag is probably 3 times the size of a football field. So 300 yards, 400 yards maybe. Freshwater floats on saltwater. If the bag breaks, okay, you might get a local contamination. Freshwater with saltwater, it's not a big environmental issue. And it's much cheaper than the shipping containers, but no takers yet. I know one of the guys who manufactures this and has been trying to sell this in the Middle East and also on the California coast, and he still hasn't found a buyer for this. All right, so why am I throwing all these examples at you? Because there's a lot of issues here. And this is a topic I've started looking into. If anybody's looking for a topic for research, there's not much out there. But if you think about it, you're taking water out of one country, which means there's less water in that country, wherever river or aquifer that is being drained. Are there any environmental implications? Well, maybe. You're now putting water in an environment that doesn't normally have that much water. So now you might even be creating a microclimate. And that's one of the concerns in some of these Middle Eastern countries and arid countries. If you're going to bring in bulk water, what are you going to do with that water? Are you going to create a new forest, an agricultural community, or what that could create sort of an interesting microclimate? And then what happens if the water delivery stops and that whole microclimate just disappears? Which brings in national security implications. Does your country really want to be water dependent on another country? Turkey, for about 60 or 70 years, has been proposing what it calls the peace pipeline, which would be a pipeline going from Turkey down to Saudi Arabia, to Jordan, to Israel, maybe even all the way down to Egypt. Nobody's taken them up on their offer because nobody wants to be dependent on Turkey, entrusting them on whether they're going to keep the pipes open. Trade implications. Is water a commodity? Is it something that should be bought and sold? Is it subject to international trade rules? And then the last point I threw up on the slide, is there a conflict between commodification of water and the human right to water, which is a topic that I want to address, at least the human rights part of it today. So with that, I just thought this was just a fascinating story, ongoing. There was even a NAFTA lawsuit. 17 irrigation districts in southern Texas sued the country of Mexico for failing to deliver water down the Rio Conchos and the Rio Grande. which they claimed was their water right, and Mexico failed to deliver it. So the question there was, well, is water a commodity? Is it something that's investable? These are issues that have not been fully developed and considered, and what are the implications of? So I thought this was a neat article I thought I'd throw out. And does anybody have any thoughts or comments about this? Should we be transferring bulk water across countries? Nobody thought about it?
I mean, I think it depends on the circumstances
Yeah?
and where and what. I mean, I don't think you can really generalize as to whether it's good or bad. I mean, from a broad perspective, but maybe in Alaska, if it's going to California, it could. And there's plenty of water in Alaska, and we know
Yeah.
that California has some problems.
Canada's lots of water, right? So we should all go up to get Canada to deliver water to the world. Where are my Canadians? Weren't there a couple? Yeah. So it's an interesting topic. The Canadians have been very, very boisterous about not exporting or not allowing the export of their water because they're concerned about environmental implications. I mean, this is a country very water rich, but the environment is to a large degree dependent on that water. So really interesting topics. Any other thoughts from Galveston or from College Station? If not, we can move on. But I want to just I thought this was an interesting topic. All right. Then what we'll do, then let's move in to the topic of the human right to water. All right, so first of all, should water be a right, a human right? Let me do a couple of slides, and then I'll open it up for discussion. All right, you all have seen this slide. I put it up on the screen last class. Does this justify a human right to water? All these people without water, all these people dying, does this justify a human right to water?
Can you define what a human right is?
We'll get to that question. Yeah, what is a human right? But I mean, does this justify that everybody should be entitled to a human right to water? It seems obvious that those 900 million people who do not have adequate drinking water, they don't seem to enjoy some kind of a right to water, right?
But do you need to look at the underlying cause of why they don't have drinking water if they're in an extremely rural area or a drought-ridden area, or if the government just isn't supplying it, or it's a poor country, they can't afford to supply it to the rural areas?
Okay, so is a right to water dependent on the climatic or environmental?
So
or
right, then whose duty is it to provide that water? If it's a country that can't afford it versus a country that can, and it might have, just bad leadership or something.
So are human rights relative? Meaning some countries can afford human rights and some countries can't afford them?
No, but before you say that everyone has the blanket right, I think you have to look at the underlying cause.
Okay. Anybody else? Any other thoughts about whether all these world water ills justify having a human right to water?
Looking at the figures, I asked myself if you made water a human right, what kind of impact it would have on the numbers. So let's say you make it a human right. Is it going to reduce that significantly, or is what's the impact?
So just declaring water as a human right, will it actually have an effect? Because I think that goes to the other questions of, well, what does it mean to have a human right? And if you have a country that might claim water as a human right but can't actually implement it because of resource challenges and so on. How about this next slide? Remember I had the slide up with the Falkenmark Index, and you needed I think her study suggested that you needed about 1,700 cubic meters per person per year on average to live an adequate, comfortable lifestyle, and that's averaged over agricultural production, human needs, and industry, and so on. And look at all those orange countries in the Middle East, and they're existing under 1,000, and many of them under 500 cubic meters per person per year. Does this suggest that we need to have some kind of human right to water? And how would this slide be different in terms of its justification than the last slide?
I think similar to the previous slide, you again ask what would the impact be. Again, if you declare it to be a human right, and you look at the regions that are that have less water.
Yeah.
Okay, so you have it as a human right. How's that going to impact these regional issues? Are you going to transport water from areas that have more to areas that have less? Is it their obligation? Is it
Okay.
Do the areas that have less have a right to go somewhere else and get water?
So does Sudan or Egypt or Libya, should they have a right to go to Canada and get some water? Or does Canada have the obligation to deliver it?
Do I think so? No, but I think that question comes up when you have that discussion about human rights and you look at it in this context. What does it mean in this context to have a human right to water?
The last slide focused more on people and individuals, the number of people without. This is more of a country level, the countries that are with or without. Would you, and again, we're just talking generalities. I mean, does the human right come into play? And is it a human right to water?
I see a human right to the accessibility to water. A country should not be closed off from the ability to get water.
Countries should not?
A country
Okay.
Should not be cut off from the ability to go, let's say, on the open market, if you're talking about it as a commodity, to get it. If there's forces being applied so they can't go out and get water if they want it. I think that is a form of a human right.
So their ability to go out on the market to buy water, but what if nobody wants to sell them? So is there a violation of human rights?
It's a tough question.
Would certainly impact global politics, but yeah, I think where Patrick said that's the human right to accessibility.
Okay.
It's a little bit different than the human right to clean water versus the human right to maybe purchase water.
Okay.
So I think it's kind of a variable.
All right. In the this next slide, these are some of the issues that we're going to cover. But before we cover these, I want to actually do a quick case study, and then we'll come back to these questions. In the recommended, not required reading, I mentioned the Cochabamba Declaration. I just want to give you a quick case study about what happened here and how that declaration came about. Bolivia, South America, relatively lower to middle developing level. In the 1990s, they were suffering from considerable international debt, and they were forced to borrow more money from the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. But at the time, the World Bank and the IMF were imposing fairly stringent economic requirements on any country that was receiving their loans. And for Bolivia, they were focusing on privatization. And what they recommended, at least one of the recommendations, was that they privatize in the city of Cochabamba their water management system. So Cochabamba decided, let's go ahead and do that, and they brought in this, they had a bidding process, and they brought in this Aguas de Tunari, which is a consortium of a couple different companies, and the one that really comes to mind is Bechtel, because they're the ones who were sort of the ones singled out in this particular situation, and they were the ones probably with most of the backing supporting the consortium. What happened was, as soon as this consortium came into a position of starting to manage the local water provision system, the water utility, they started implementing reforms and repairs. They wanted to expand the infrastructure. They wanted to deliver water to communities that didn't have any piping. They had all these great plans, but they needed to raise the rates, and they raised it depending on where you were in the city and what circumstances, somewhere between 40 to 200%. And this is on the local Cochabamba communities and individual. Really, really soon after they raised the rates, they started to have riots. And you can see just from these, they called out not just the police, but the army to try to control the riots. And these were thousands and thousands of Bolivians in an uproar about the increase in the water rates. What's interesting to know is that in many cases, people who were not on the water grid were paying, before this system, the new consortium was brought in, they were paying between 8 to 10 times as much of people who were on the grid that was being run by the government at the time. This was supposed to bring them water at a lower rate, but they had to raise the rates on some others who were either already on the system or had some kind of access to the system. Most of them were not very happy. And in fact, soon after, in 2000, Bolivia was forced to cancel the contract. They went to arbitration, and they finally settled around 2006. But they came up with this Cochabamba Declaration. And this declaration was a citizens' assembly that took place. At the end, near the end of 2000, December, and as you can see, here's where they declare that water is a human right. Water belongs to the earth and all species and is sacred to life. Therefore, the water must be conserved, reclaimed, and protected for all future generations. Water is a fundamental human right and a public trust to be guarded by all levels of government. Therefore, it should not be commodified, meaning you should not make it a commodity. It should not be privatized or traded for commercial purposes. These rights must be enshrined at all levels of government. In particular, an international treaty must ensure these principles are non-controvertible, and water is best practiced by local communities. So this was the result of this controversy, very well-known controversy down in Bolivia. All right, with this as a background, should there be a right to water? Should you all, sitting in Galveston, sitting here, sitting in College Station, do you believe you have do you have a right to water right now as you sit here? The folks in Bolivia didn't think they had a right, so they were trying to claim it. At least they didn't believe it was being protected.
Is it a right not to have the price on our water bill raised 200%, or is it a right to the water in the first place?
Well, do you have a right to water? We'll define. We'll give it meat in a minute. Yeah. But I mean, do you as a human being, do you have a right to water?
So, and does that mean that the right to not have private involvement in the delivery of the water?
I haven't defined it in any way. I've not put any limitations. All I want to know is, do you have a right to water? Are you entitled to water?
Well, you asked, as we sit here in College Station or in Galveston or where you are, do we have the right to water? I believe we do because we have life, liberty, pursuit of happiness for Declaration of Independence. As Americans, yes, we do have right to water. As another country, it's really, vaguely, it just really depends. If you are in the African continent, that's what they're really fighting for. They don't really know where they can get it. They don't know where, political-wise, policy-wise, where to find it. But, I mean, who's one person to say that they're born into a culture that they can be proud of, but, they should have the right to grab that life source.
But hold on there. Why should we here in the United States enjoy a human right to water and not the folks in Africa? Is there something about the political system? Is it something about something else that says that we should have it? We do enjoy it, but they don't or don't yet.
Can you try to put it a little bit differently? I'm trying to wrap my mind around that question.
No, this is tough, and I just want to get a sense because I think you mentioned African countries, and I think you put it in terms of they're striving for that right, but maybe they haven't gotten there yet. While we do have that right to water here, and I think you mentioned the Bill of Rights and so on. Is it because they don't have a Bill of Rights?
It's a starting point. I mean, there has to be some kind of group or entity that says this is what comes first. And
okay.
For America, the United States, I think that's what might have came first is life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. For other countries, I can't say what it is or what it isn't, but I think that's where it starts as some kind of group entity that says this is our number one priority. Does that make sense?
So you're suggesting that rights come from your political system and it has to be given by your political system?
Oh, man. What the question was, are your rights given to you from a political system or as a birthright? Right?
Good. Is it? Do you have a right just because you're a human, or is it because you're a citizen of a particular country?
Well, that's where this dilemma falls into place, is because the idea of the human rights is something that any person is born with, no matter what political entity there is. And there's things happening all over the world that every person has these human rights, these rights given to you by being alive. But there's people taking advantage of that all over the people in different ways, taking those rights away. So it's kind of difficult to say whether you're born with those rights or what, because maybe they're not as protected as much as they should be if you're born with them. Does that make sense? Or not?
Yeah, no, it does. And I think that if I can take your point a little bit further, if you're saying that you're born with them, the fact that a government or another authority protects them to different degrees doesn't mean that you have any lesser right. It's just an issue of the government isn't protecting them. Right?
Right.
Did you have something?
Well, in a way, it sounded like he was giving it was the government giving us that right. And if that's the case, like the life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, those are given to us just for being a citizen. We don't have to pay for that. We have to pay for every sort of water we have.
Okay.
And so that, to me, it doesn't seem like it would
Well,
be
we
a
pay
political
taxes.
right. That's true. I don't know. To me, I don't think it seems like a political right at all. I think
Okay.
it seems to pay for it individually.
Well, let's break this down. What is a right in and of itself? How would you define a right? Just this is a simple definition. I don't want to get too complicated, but what is a right? Okay, an entitlement,
Yeah.
something that can't be withheld from you or
Yeah.
prevented from you enjoying it.
Yeah, and that contrasted with the right to give it to you. I think it can't be withheld from you.
Okay, say that last part again.
It's a little. It seems like there's kind of a dichotomy between the right to access or get the water and somebody give you the water versus the right to not have the water withheld from you.
Okay,
Maybe that just gives the country
Good.
the way out.
good.
Wouldn't a right be also something that can be enforceable, something that, it has to be enforced in a way? Like the
Well,
whole thing about water is just obviously a little confusing because, we are born with, we need water to live, but at the same time, different countries see water differently. We have green golf courses and water fountains when there's other countries that don't even have water to drink. So I don't know, I feel like when it comes to a right, it's tricky, obviously, of defining it. So.
well, but the question, I think it's a good question. Does the right exist if it's not capable of being enforced? Because if it's something that can't be taken away from you, that means you have that right, but they may not actually be protecting it or enforcing it. Or is that then, if it's not enforceable, then it's not a right?
Anyone? Well, I guess that's where it comes to needing to spell it out correctly. Like, it's a right given to you, or are they supposed to, if they don't protect it or they don't kind of monitor it, is it taking away from it being a right? It's just, go ahead. Someone's gonna come and help me and say.
All right, co-counsel.
I think if we're going to look at water as a right, if we're going to look at it from a perspective of being given to you or not, then we're treating it more as a privilege than a right. So if someone could take that so depending on the political system you're in or the country, then this is a privilege given to you if it could be taken away from you. So, and if we want to look at it as a human right, then I think human is across or doesn't know borders or countries or political systems. So if we want to look at it as a human right, the two words human right, I think, yes, we all as humans need to have access to water which could sustain our well-being, basically.
Okay, I like that distinction between something that you're entitled to versus something that you have a privilege to have. And it seems like you're suggesting that if it's a right, certainly a human right, it's something that is not just a privilege, but you're entitled to regardless of who you are, where you are, or what's your social status, or maybe even the ability of the government to enforce it.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah?
Yes.
Okay. So let me ask, if you have a human right, who do you hold it up against? Who has the obligation to protect it, or protect it for you, or not take it away?
Yeah, that's not a trivial question. Part of it would be governments, part of it could be entities like UN entities, which would help in making sure that people do get access to this right.
Well, let's start with government.
Mm-hmm.
Is it your government that has the obligation, or is it the government of Canada, which has so much water, or the government of Sudan, which doesn't?
I mean,
For you,
going
living
back-
in the United States.
Yeah, I think a lot of the water going back to the map that you showed on the water-stressed countries and the argument of should we transport water from Canada to or the U.S. to these countries, I think this is happening, but in a virtual form through food exports, basically, which is where most of the water exists. So I don't think if we just look at water from the physical water perspective, we'd be capturing all the picture here, especially if we're talking in a global perspective, because most of the water is traded virtually through food products, and that's already happening today. And so yes, there is a lot of water that is being moved from the U.S. to Egypt through wheat exports from different. I mean, this is why all the stressed countries that were shown on the map are net exporters of food products. So I think that is happening today.
Okay. So so if they are exporting food or water through the food products and other products, are they somehow violating human rights? And if they are, whose human rights are they violating?
Why do you say so? Why do you say it would be violating human rights? Who's
Well,
human
if there's a human right to water, then and you have individuals who are not receiving water, but you have shipments of food products and other products that use a lot of water. So is there some kind of
I think
violation
it
of human
becomes-
rights by not giving that water to those individuals who are thirsty?
I think that there is a trade-off between, I mean, as a country which is exporting its food products, there is that trade-off between economic benefit out of exporting versus using that water locally for people who need it. From a water-scarce country, I mean, it comes at a cost. It comes at a cost. You could be using that water to produce food products to make economic profit out of it through export, rather than using it for your local population. But I mean, it's a trade-off. And yes, if such an action.
Well, let me ask you this:
yeah.
Are human rights derogable? Meaning, can a country, a government, decide to derogate from at least certain human rights? Meaning, today we're not going to enforce this particular human rights. No free speech today or next week. We can't afford it. Or next week, no water. We need water for all the crops that we're selling overseas. Can a country do that?
Again, I think if we're treating it that way, then we're not looking at it as a right, but more as a privilege.
Okay. So you cannot derogate from human rights because you're entitled to them. It's not a privilege.
Yeah.
So who is obligated to enforce that entitlement? Is it your own government?
I think it's different entities at different scales. But who is there like one entity which would be making sure?
Well,
Well, I believe from a humanitarian point of view, everyone is obliged. Whoever can help should help. Country number one can help country number two if they can do that, if they're not, taking something from their own nationals. So everyone should help.
okay, so Canada should be helping all the countries in the Middle East and every other water-scarce country in the world.
If they can, yes, they should do.
Who pays for it?
Shouldn't be something that countries should pay for because it's a right eventually. They should try to help. I mean, Canada should try to help.
So Canada should put up all the money to transport the water to Middle Eastern countries.
Not all the money. I mean, they have to take care of their own business first, their own nationals first, and then try to do their best to help other countries.
Yeah. I'm trying to push you all to think about what is a right, what is a human right, and who is responsible for enforcing human rights, because this is something that is really, really challenging. There's lots of articles and books and stuff written about this, and it's controversial. The basic notion of a right, I think, going towards an entitlement is probably the consensus, the greater consensus. If you declare something that is a right, certainly a human right, you're entitled to it, and nobody is supposed to be able to take that away from you. Which means that somebody has to protect it for you if they can't take it away from you. If the government doesn't protect you from your right being taken away, that means the government is at fault. So, for example, if a private citizen takes away your water, well, that's theft. If the government is in control of that private individual who has taken your water, now we're talking about rights being addressed. In the first example, it's not rights in the same sense. It's just theft, it's property. Or it's some kind of other property-related issue. Whereas if the government becomes involved, the government as a policy matter is affecting your rights and your access or your ability to enjoy that particular right. So if the government is responsible, what exactly is their obligation? Do they actually have to give you water, or do they have to do something less than giving you water in order to protect your right to water?
It's based on the demands of the people on their government and how that system was developed.
Based on the demands of the people in each country.
Yeah. So, for example, here we see, water as a right, and we've developed, laws and regulations and have certain demands of our politicians to do certain things to provide water in a certain form.
Yeah.
Are they required to, bring me water personally wherever I am? I don't think that's how the people as a whole have, that's their request or demand of the government. So how, what's their responsibility? My response would be, well, it's whatever the people have told them the responsibility is.
So is what you're saying that human rights are relative, at least to water, because of what the citizens demand in China is different versus what the citizens demand in the United States? So they have you implement different degrees of protecting the water, right to water?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think in that sense, it's you define the right to water. It could be defined locally, and those definitions can vary from location to location. The right to water, the definition of that right, I think a different way to look at it is it comes from me individually. If someone is withholding that water or taking that water from me, what type of actions can I take that are seen by my peers, the people I live with, as being reasonable? Okay.
So human rights are not universal.
I think that's a different way of looking at what a right is, right? So. Okay.
I have it was kind of a question, but now / a comment saying what Patrick is saying. When you mean who's going to enforce the water right, are we talking just the U.S. or globally? Because I feel like all the government or the entities that are in power having water is the power. Earlier someone mentioned, each country should help each other, but we know, throughout history, that's really never going to happen. It would be great if we all could, hold hands and just share everything, but that's not reality. So when you mean who's going to be, enforcing it, are we talking just each country is going to have a thing? And how Patrick was saying, obviously they all have different demands and different things that are going to go with it. So are they all just supposed to get together and decide this country's going to be treated differently, but then it comes an argument about power and who has more of it, I believe, maybe. It's just kind of a question / comment.
Yeah, and so that goes to my question: are human rights universal? Do people in Sri Lanka enjoy the same? If we say there's a human right to water, do people in Sri Lanka enjoy the same human right to water versus the people in Chile, versus the people in Ethiopia, versus the people in the United States?
No, I mean, sadly, that's how the world, we have all like developed at different rates, and we have different governments, and we've been brought up completely different. So yes, all human beings should have the right of water to where no one dies of thirst. But sadly, everyone knows that's not how the world goes. I mean, here we are sitting in an AC with technology, and we luckily get to shower every day if you want to, but there's other places that don't even have that option. So who gets to sit there and be like, yeah, U.S., because you're ahead of the game, you get to get this much water, and you guys over there that shower once a month, it's just, it's interesting to see how they're supposed to, all these countries sit down and talk about a source that is needed for everyone to survive, for food consumption, for religious things. There's so many things that tie into water. So, yeah, it was just a thought.
But I don't think you're arguing that everybody has a different human right to water. I think what you're arguing is everybody has a different capacity to enforce it, or to have it enforced, based on availability of resource, or based on the government's ability to enforce.
I guess in a way it boils down to that, but doesn't every resource that we have boils down to who has more power, and who has had power in the past, and who like joins together and starts working together towards something? It's sad to think about it that see water I mean, it's kind of a gold nowadays, but yes, it is something that everyone needs, but human themselves are not going to be like, sadly, that's their instinct, not going to be like, oh yeah, let's just share water with everyone, because people are thinking like, oh, we're a population growth and we want to make sure we have green lawns and we have the production and we can import and export. And I mean, it's very complicated, and it gets down to a lot of things. It's just not just government, it's like politics and religion and people's morals, and a lot of things go into it. So it should be interesting who just gets to decide who gets what. That's just my thought.
Okay. But I think I don't think you're arguing that people have different human rights to water. It's just different capacity to implement it and enforce it. At least that's what I'm understanding in what you're saying.
It kind of sounds like she was saying that different customs in different countries and different expectations, like what you said about like we water our lawns here versus in Bolivia, they're not going to water their lawns. So the expectation and custom isn't there. So.
Okay, but that doesn't mean that we have different levels of a human right to water.
Correct. All humans should get all the water they want, but that's not how, sadly, it works right now.
Is it want or is it need? Is it want or is it need?
That's the question. Obviously, every human has different, like, wanting and needing also, because some people are like high maintenance compared to others, but you just need water to drink and grow food, so you need to eat food, and also we need water for clothes and water for everything. But I'm just saying, you can't put everything like in a balance, like, oh, these people and these people have the same wants and needs. So yeah.
Okay. So if we can cut out all the wants and just focus on the needs, can we at least agree somewhat that we all have at least the same basic needs, whether we're in Russia or South Africa or Mexico? You need water to survive, yes?
Yeah, I think if you look at it on a global level, right, you're looking at it as one system. I think the answer to that question seems obvious. Yes, we all have a right to water. We all have a right to a certain amount of water for our needs and possibly for our wants. The issues and complexities come in because of the logistics of where the water is. And, some areas of the world have more, some areas have less, and then that's where the issues kind of arise.
Yeah. But everybody has the same needs. You need water to live, to survive, to cook, to at least those bare minimum, right?
Yeah, I think, when you were talking earlier about what is a right, I, for some reason, was thinking about criminal law. If someone was trying to take my life, I have a right to defend myself. And if it comes to the point where I end up killing the other person. In that society, that is, in our society, that's allowed.
Yeah.
That's my right. If someone were trying to take water from me and I was not going to have water to survive, do I have a right to go out and change that? I would say yes.
Okay.
Right? So I think that's a different way to define what a right is. Are the people in the society that I live in going to see my actions as reasonable if I'm deprived of that resource?
Okay, if an individual comes up to you and does something to you that affects your water, your ability to water, is that individual violating your human right to water?
I think if it gets to the point of it'll impact my ability to live, different degrees.
Think under constitutional law. Those of you law students here, think in constitutional terms. What is a right, and who can violate your rights versus who can affect your things or your way of life or what you do? Because what you gave the criminal example. If somebody's trying to kill you, are they violating your right to life? Or are they trying to cause you harm that affects your life? Is it a right issue or is it a criminal issue?
I think in the context of water, it could be both. You're talking about right to your things. Well, water is a thing, but it affects your life.
Okay, but if an individual does it versus the government,
do I have a right to stop them from affecting my access to the water?
right?
Yes.
But when you say you have a right to protect your stuff from somebody interfering, is that a water right, or is that a right under our legal system that says you can protect yourself and your stuff?
I think not necessarily. I'm not responding specifically to our system, but I think generally, if someone is taking something from you that's going to impact your life, somewhat immediately, like, I don't know how many days you can live without water, 5 days, 4 days, it seems reasonable to be able to take action to...
Why?
Why? Because I see it no different than someone attacking you and is going to take your life right now.
Well, but wait a minute. What gives you the right to defend yourself lethally against somebody trying to kill you?
Because the society that you live in says that you can do that.
It says it. Where does it say so? Where does the society you live in say so?
Let's say, is it written down? I'm not saying it's written down. It's an agreement among the people.
It is written down. What's that?
It's in the law,
Which law?
like the law of the United States.
A little more specific. We're talking about taking a life. Which law is it? Criminal law.
Yeah, it's a criminal code.
It's the criminal code.
Yeah, I'm talking in a general sense. So that's a specific example for the U.S.
Right.
Yes.
Right. But so what I'm saying is, your quote unquote right to protect yourself is not a right that's constitutional, and it's not the same type of right as a human right. It comes out of the criminal code, which says you have a right to protect your life, because you don't have a right to go out and kill someone, but that's only because the code says that. And in some jurisdictions, some global jurisdictions, the right to defend yourself is very different. The example is battered women. In some jurisdictions, you're allowed to take the life of your batterer, the person beating you up. In other jurisdictions, it's not. But that's out of the criminal code, not as a right to life.
Yes, but the criminal code in the U.S. is written the way it is because the people that are voting, to have those laws, that's how we create it in different countries.
Good.
It's different. So it kind of goes to the point is, what's reasonable or what is accepted in different societies.
So where's the right to life come in? You mentioned the right to life. It's not in the criminal code. It's a higher level.
To me, it's in a religious book.
Well, we don't need to get into religion right now, not yet. But where is the right to life in the U.S. legal system? Law students, come on.
Constitution.
The Constitution.
That little thing.
All right? And what does it say? Come on, what is this? What's
The right to life.
right to life? What does it say?
Happiness.
What's that?
She says you have a right to life. Liberty,
No, it
and
doesn't.
happiness.
It doesn't say you have the right to life.
We are endowed.
I
No.
don't know the exact word. I'm finding for you.
If I can find it here. I had it up a little bit ago. Here's the Bill of Rights. Amendment number 5.
Secure.
What does it say?
Amendment number 4.
Or 4.
To be secure in their person.
To be secure in your person. Okay. No person shall be held to answer for a capital or otherwise infamous crime unless a grand jury. Where is it? No, nor be deprived of life. Towards the end of Amendment 5, right? Who is this held against?
The government.
The government. The government shall not do these things. The government shall not deprive you of your rights. So when we talk about civil rights or human rights, all these types of rights, it's the government that we're holding these up against. Yeah.
But isn't it, like for us, it's the people that we demand that of our government. In other countries, those people may not demand the same things of their government that we do. And if the people are okay with the way their
Good.
government is, then they accept the way their government treats them. But if they want more, like we have over, the generations, we demanded that our government treat us better.
All right. So human rights are relative based on what you demand?
I think there's a baseline of where it would be wonderful and ideal if the whole world treated everyone wonderfully and people didn't fight or anything. Then I think it's also based on different countries and what you're willing to accept from your government and the rights that you demand from it.
So people in a totalitarian country are entitled to less of human rights because they haven't demanded more than we have here in the United States.
It's not they're entitled to less, they're just taking less.
They're
And
accepting
demanding,
less.
they're accepting.
But we talked about it in terms of entitlements. So they're entitled to the same amount, but they're taking less. That's what you're saying.
Well, I would kind of have to agree with what she was saying because defined by the Universal Bill of Rights or Human Rights defined by the United Nations, we have the right to life, liberty, and happiness.
Sure.
But that's only recognized and enforced by certain governments. And I would have to say probably Europe is pretty good at that, and so is the United States. But there are a lot of other countries that don't recognize that at all. So
does that mean the people who live there aren't entitled to it?